You know that feeling when you finally got something you've worked for your whole life, something peaceful, something yours, and then somebody decides they're entitled to take it away? That's exactly where this story begins. After years of hard work and a lifetime of living in cramped apartments, I inherited a piece of land from my late uncle. It wasn't just any land. This was the kind of place you dream about when you're stuck in traffic or sitting in an office cubicle staring at fluorescent lights. A patch of green woods, tucked away from the noise, with just enough open space. For a cabin and a driveway, I had one vision: build my dream cabin. Nothing fancy, nothing massive, just a cozy, wood-built place to call my own. A porch to drink coffee on, a fire pit for friends, a workshop for the Jeep I loved working on. For the first time in years, life felt like it was moving in the right direction. And then, she showed up. Karen, the self-declared queen of the neighborhood, president of the HOA, a woman who walked like she owned the ground she stepped on, with a clipboard clutched to her chest and an expression that said, "I know better than you and I'm here to prove it." I'll never forget our first encounter. I was out by the cabin frame hammering in the first beams when I heard the sharp click of heels on gravel. "Excuse me?" she snapped. Not a hello, not a smile, just pure Karen. "Do you have a permit for this structure?" I turned, sweaty, tired but polite. "Yeah, it's all in order with the county. This is my land." Wrong answer. Karen's eyes narrowed. She raised her clipboard like it was a weapon. "This cabin isn't up to HOA standards. It violates setback rules, aesthetic guidelines, and frankly, it's an eyesore. It will have to be demolished." I almost laughed. Almost. "Ma'am, this property isn't part of your HOA. My uncle's land was never signed into it. You don't have jurisdiction here." That one word, jurisdiction, must have stung her pride. She straightened her blazer and pursed her lips. "We'll see about that." And just like that, she marched off, already plotting. At first, I thought it was just posturing, a little neighborhood busybody routine. Everyone's met someone like Karen, the kind of person who lives for rules, fines, and making other people miserable. But this wasn't just nosy neighbor behavior. This was something darker. Within a week, I started receiving letters. Fake violation notices slipped under my door. Envelopes with HOA headers demanding I pay fines for unauthorized construction and aesthetic disruption. I ignored them at first. After all, I knew she had no power here. But Karen didn't back down. She escalated. One morning, I came outside to find two neighbors standing awkwardly by the road. They gave me a sympathetic look and whispered, "She's telling everyone you're breaking the law. She said the county is coming to bulldoze your cabin." Rumors, lies, pressure tactics, Karen's greatest weapons. Still, I pushed forward with the cabin, hammer by hammer, nail by nail. I was determined not to let some power-tripping HOA president derail my dream. But Karen wasn't done, not even close. A few nights later, I heard the metallic clink of chains. I slipped on my boots and stepped outside, only to see the beam of a flashlight sweeping across my driveway. And there she was, Karen, clipboard still in one hand, bolt cutters in the other, crouched by the chain lock I'd put across my gate. Snip. The lock hit the ground. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I shouted. She jerked up, startled, but not embarrassed. If anything, she looked defiant. "As HOA president, I have full rights to inspect this property. You are in violation of multiple codes, and until this is resolved, I'll be coming and going as I please." I couldn't believe it. She actually thought she could break onto private property, with bolt cutters no less, and call it legal. "You're trespassing," I snapped. "You need to leave before I call the sheriff." Karen smirked. "Go ahead, call. They'll side with me." Her arrogance was unbelievable, and in that moment, something inside me shifted. This wasn't just an annoying neighbor. This was a full-blown battle for my land, my home, and my peace, and I had no idea just how far she was willing to go to take it all away. Because cutting my lock? That was just the beginning. If Karen cutting my lock was the opening shot in this, war, what came next was her full invasion. From that night forward, she didn't even bother hiding her obsession. She was on my property almost daily, strutting up and down the gravel drive like she owned it, snapping pictures on her phone, muttering into her recorder. I swear the woman had an entire case file on me, like she was some kind of detective, and the letters, oh, they multiplied. Every morning I'd find new envelopes in my mailbox. Violation notice, improper building materials. Violation notice, unapproved vehicle on property. Violation notice, unsightly debris. Debris? She meant my Jeep. Now let me pause here. That Jeep wasn't just a vehicle, it was a beast. Olive green, military-spec tires, reinforced frame. A Jeep with history. I'd picked it up through a contact in law enforcement. Let's just say it wasn't your average Wrangler. It belonged technically to a federal task force. And though I kept it on my property, it wasn't really mine to begin with. But Karen didn't know that. All she saw was a rugged Jeep parked by my workshop. And in her mind, if it didn't fit her suburban aesthetic, it had to go. She started, sending me fines, hundreds then thousands of dollars, claiming the Jeep was an abandoned junk vehicle. She even sent a tow truck one afternoon trying to haul it away. I caught the driver halfway down my driveway. Poor guy looked terrified. "Ma'am called it in," he stammered. Said this was HOA property and the Jeep was a code violation. I nearly laughed. This Jeep belongs to federal law enforcement. If you put that hook on it, you'll be the one in violation. The driver's eyes went wide, and he backed out faster than I'd ever seen. But Karen wasn't done. She doubled, down with paperwork. I later found out she forged signatures, from neighbors, from people who'd moved away years ago, even from one guy who'd been dead for 6 months, all to try and force through a vote declaring my property part of the HOA. It was like she was rewriting reality. Some neighbors whispered about it. A couple even pulled me aside. "Look, man," one said, "we're scared of her. She fines us if our grass is too long. She's threatened to foreclose on people. Everyone hates her, but no one wants to cross her." And that's when I realized I wasn't just fighting for my land. I was fighting the monster who'd been terrorizing this neighborhood for years. Karen had built a whole empire of fear, and I was the first one who dared to say no. So she escalated again. One morning I was jolted awake by a pounding on the door. Sheriff's deputies, 2 of them, hands on their belts, grim expressions on their faces. "Sir," one said, "we've had multiple complaints about unpermitted construction, fire hazards, and an illegal vehicle on your property." I could practically see Karen's smug face peeking from behind the hedges across the road. I handed the deputies my paperwork. County permits, exemption documents, every legal record I'd kept meticulously. "This is all in order," I told them. They flipped through, frowned, then exchanged a look. "That's strange," the other deputy said, "because the complaint packet we received looks different. That was one way to put. Turns out the complaint forms were doctored. Signatures didn't match. Dates were wrong. Whole pages had been cut and pasted. It was fraud, plain and simple. And while the deputies couldn't prove it right there on the spot, I knew, and they knew, exactly who was behind it. Karen. But here's the thing about people like her. The higher they climb on their little throne, the harder the fall when someone finally pulls the rug out. And by trying to drag my Jeep into this war, Karen hadn't just picked a fight with me. She'd picked a fight with people far, far above her HOA pay grade, because tampering with federal property, that isn't just an HOA violation. That's a federal crime. And Karen had no idea she was walking straight into it. When you're in a fight like this, you learn to document everything. Every letter, every fake violation notice, every witness who saw Karen cutting my lock or screaming across the fence. I kept it all. But here's the thing. Even with all the evidence, I knew Karen wasn't going to stop. People like her don't retreat. They double down. She'd already broken into my property, tampered with my Jeep, and tried to tow it under false pretenses. To her, this was about control, not right or wrong. What she didn't realize was that the ground she stood on wasn't as solid as she thought. See, my late uncle wasn't just the kind of man who built a cabin and called it a day. He was meticulous. He'd been around the block when it came to real estate and development. In fact, he was one of the original investors who had bought up big chunks of land before this neighborhood even existed. One rainy afternoon, digging through his old files, the workshop, I found it, a thick folder of deeds, permits, and handwritten notes. And in that folder was something Karen had never expected, a hidden clause. The clause was simple but powerful. My uncle's property and any structures on it were forever exempt from HOA jurisdiction. It was written into the original deed before the HOA was even formed. And here's the kicker. Because of how the deed was worded, the HOA itself technically owed easement rights across my land for utilities. In plain English, Karen had zero authority over me, and I had leverage over her entire HOA. I remember sitting back in my chair, rain pounding on the roof, laughing out loud. The very empire she was using to crush me. It was built on a foundation with cracks so wide you could drive my Jeep through them. Of course, I wasn't going to reveal my hand too soon. Timing was everything. Meanwhile, Karen's obsession was hitting new heights. She started intimidating neighbors who spoke to me. One family told me she slapped them with a $500 fine for leaving their trash bins out an hour too long. Another couple said she threatened to foreclose on their house over faded paint. The neighborhood wasn't just scared anymore. They were furious. They just didn't know how to fight back. That's when I started sharing what I'd found. Quietly, strategically, I showed a few trusted neighbors copies of my deed clause. I told them what it meant. Karen wasn't as powerful as she claimed. The HOA's queen was standing on sand, and word started to spread. But while I was building my case, Karen was digging her own grave. The county began investigating after I handed the sheriff's deputies proof of the forged complaints. They noticed signatures from people who hadn't lived here in years. They flagged dates that didn't match. One investigator even muttered, "This looks like fraud." Fraud. The magic word, Karen, of course, didn't slow down. If anything, she grew bolder. She called in another complaint, this time claiming my cabin was an illegal fire hazard. She tried to pressure the county into forcing me to tear it down, but she made a critical mistake. She used those same doctored forms, and investigators weren't stupid. Around the same time, the Jeep incident caught the wrong kind of attention. Remember how Karen had cut my lock and tried to tow it? Well, when she reported it as abandoned, that report didn't just vanish into thin air. It got flagged, and when someone in the sheriff's office ran the Jeep's VIN, alarms went off, because that Jeep wasn't just a rugged off-road toy. It was still technically under federal jurisdiction, part of a task force vehicle pool, and tampering with it, even cutting a lock to access it, was a serious federal offense. Let me paint the picture. While Karen was gloating over her clipboard, laughing about her latest violation notice, a separate file with her name on, it was quietly making its way across a federal desk. I didn't even have to lift a finger. She was setting herself up. By the end of the month, I had neighbors whispering encouragement, a lawyer friend prepping documents, county investigators sniffing around Karen's paperwork, and, unknown to her, federal agents starting to take interest. Karen still thought she was winning. She strutted past my property with her little smirk, clipboard in hand, like she was queen of the block, but queens fall hardest when the throne crumbles. And Karen was about to find out just how fragile her empire really was. Karen always believed she was untouchable. She strutted down the streets with her clipboard like a sheriff in a one-stoplight town, convinced that everyone had to bow to her rules. But arrogance has a funny way of blinding people. It makes them overplay their hand. And Karen? She didn't. Just overplay. She went all in with a losing hand. The last stunt had started on a Tuesday morning. I woke up to the sound of pounding on my cabin door. Not the usual neighborly knock. This was urgent, heavy, official. I opened it and nearly laughed. A SWAT team was standing on my porch. Full gear. Guns. The works. Behind them? Karen, arms folded, lips curled into the smuggest grin you've ever seen. She had called in a fake emergency. Reported that my cabin was storing illegal weapons, explosives, and that my Jeep was being used for criminal activity. I kid you not. She tried to frame me as some sort of domestic terrorist. But here's the thing about lying on that scale. It unravels fast. The officers swept the cabin. They found nothing but tools, fishing gear, and the smell of fresh coffee. The Jeep? Clean as a whistle. And while they were still processing the sheer stupidity of the call, one agent pulled me aside. He already knew about Karen. Her name had popped up weeks earlier when her little tow the Jeep stunt landed in federal databases. Now she'd crossed the line into filing false emergency reports. A felony. Her smug grin faded real quick when one officer turned and said, "Ma'am, we need to ask you a few questions." Dropping the legal bomb. While Karen was sputtering excuses, I made my move. I called my lawyer friend who showed up with a thick binder of documents, the kind that makes HOA tyrants sweat. Inside, my uncle's deed with the exemption clause. Proof that Karen had no legal authority over my land. Evidence of her forged complaints. Testimonies from neighbors she had harassed. We dropped it all in front of the county investigator, and the timing couldn't have been better. The sheriff's office, county officials, and federal agents were all there, watching Karen spin lies while the paper trail burned her throne to the ground. The investigator read through the deed, nodded, and said the words I'd been waiting for. "This property is outside the HOA's jurisdiction." Always has been. Karen froze. For the first time since this war started, she had no comeback, no smirk, no lecture about community standards. Just silence. The fall once the truth hit. Everything unraveled fast. Federal agents seized Karen's HOA files. What they found was worse than I imagined. Years of shady fines, forged signatures, and threats. She had been abusing power for so long that she forgot accountability even existed. Neighbors, emboldened by the chaos, came forward in droves. One by one, they shared their stories. The single mom fined $300 for unapproved flowers. The veteran threatened with foreclosure because his flagpole was too tall. The elderly couple forced to repaint their house 3 times in 2 years because Karen didn't like the shade of beige. It wasn't just petty harassment. It was extortion. The county opened a full investigation. Karen was removed as HOA president on the spot. Civil lawsuits piled up, and those federal charges. Let's just say tampering with government property and filing false reports isn't something you walk away from with a slap on the wrist. Her empire wasn't just collapsing. It was being bulldozed. Justice served weeks later. The neighborhood felt lighter. The air didn't feel like it was under surveillance. People waved when they passed by instead of scurrying inside, afraid of another violation notice. As for me, I finished my cabin. I parked my Jeep out front. No lock needed. Sometimes I'd catch neighbors walking by, pointing and smiling like it was some kind of monument. Karen's old clipboard, confiscated during the investigation, became the stuff of legend, a symbol of how far someone can fall when they let entitlement rule their lives. And the best part? Watching the very people she had terrorized finally stand tall again. The HOA wasn't gone. It still existed, but it was reformed, rebuilt, and stripped of Karen's iron grip. Reflection. Looking back, I realized something important. Karen thought rules made her powerful. She thought fear made her untouchable. But real power doesn't come from control. It comes from truth, patience, and a little bit of backbone. She cut my lock, tried to steal my Jeep, and nearly turned my life upside down. But in the end, she exposed herself, and that Jeep she wanted so badly to tow. It became the very thing that towed her arrogance straight into the ground. Justice wasn't just served, it was delivered with flashing lights and a federal badge.